Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Audit, the podcast where we go beyond the numbers and explore the latest development and trends in the finance world. I'm Monique Dupont, your host. Today we'll delve into the firm's Leadership Evolution Program and its impact on diversity and inclusion. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Bongiwe Mbunge, Head of Sustainability and a partner at Forvis Mazars, South Africa. Hi Bongiwe, thank you so much for being here today.
Such a pleasure.
Bongiwe, what inspired the creation of the Leadership Evolution Program and what are its primary goals?
Thank you for that question, Monique. I think that my view is that this is a program that is consistent with our spirit of engagement within the practice and that we've seen benefits of. So the inspiration really came from identifying certain gaps in terms of how we work, how we function, how we lead, and how we collaborate at a team level. And therefore really curated the course to be able to be designed for conversations, to build trust, and to be able to create safe spaces for our teams to bring things that matter to them. It could be stumbling blocks as to how they need to work and function or deliver services to the client, or it could be really on relational. How do we interact? How do we engage? And therefore, the inspiration really came from a perspective of addressing a noticeable gap and be able to create something meaningful from that space into our future.
Thank you so much for that, Bongiwe. Why is bias awareness crucial in evolving as leaders of a diverse workforce?
Thank you for that question. I just want to start off by saying that we all have bias. Each person from whatever context, background, and experience you come from, because it stems from a socialization of some sort. And therefore, the most important thing is to be aware of our biases so that the very bias that we have does not get into the way in how we lead our teams fairly and transparently. And what we're aiming for is inclusion, to be able to spark the innovation in our teams by silencing our bias so that we can actually just get to the legitimate contribution of each team member.
Bongiwe, can you share some common biases that leaders might have and how these can impact their decision making and interactions?
There are many, but I think that what has really evolved over the last while has been the connotation of ageism, because we come from, we were born at different times, we've been socialized differently. There's a certain leadership style that we have experienced on the basis of how old we are. And therefore, from a leadership perspective, it comes to how do we lead? What is our buy-in for a flatter structure to be leaders of the current and future? And that's, quite a common one that exists in multiple organizations, if not all. And therefore, I think that once we are aware of it, we are more prone to be able to shift and change, accommodate each other for the greater purpose of what we are trying to achieve.
Thank you so much for the insight. How does the LEP equip leaders with tools to navigate their own biases and manage these when interacting with others?
One of the things I've experienced in the LEP sessions is the ability to bring social context and cultural dynamic into a room, of not necessarily peers that you work with every day. They're not in your office necessarily, but they're in your service line. They might be in another region, etc. And what it does, there's a greater component of storytelling from the context of the individual, and really quite disarming at a personal level to be able to reach each person as an individual. What that does is it starts to broker trust within the group, and by the end of those sessions, there's a greater level of appreciation of persons in an individual context, which then start to emerge after, the classroom, as to how we connect, how we respond to each other, and how, to what extent we are willing to assist when there's a need. So it's about a deeper, or a start towards a deeper relationship build within the workplace.
Thank you so much, Bongiwe. Can you provide an example of how the LEP has successfully helped a leader overcome their biases?
I think what I've seen is, from an impact perspective, is coming from the teams who are led by that leader. And really, because we do a program evaluation, whereby we take context from that team's level in the context of that leader, manager, etc. Once the program has been finalized in terms of the leadership evolution, we then do a post-program reevaluation from the perspective of the teams, because the impact is going to be felt by team members who are led by that particular individual, and can be able to see a transformation, a shift, or an intent in the right direction. And that's the cultural infusion that we are hoping for, because as leaders become more conscious, it brings about a heightened awareness level and mindfulness in terms of if I don't intentionally include someone, then I'm subconsciously excluding them, which is not something that could have been a notion priorhand. And therefore, when it comes to decision making, it's a self-check, because now we know better, and therefore we do better.
What are the tangible and measurable shifts you have observed in leader-staff interactions as a result of the LEP, and how do you measure its success?
Let me start off by what's not readily measurable, and that is really from a personal leadership perspective that I have definitely seen. And really, if I could summarize it, it would be the willingness to, at an individual level, place yourself in discomfort. Because you know that if I take myself outside of my comfort zone in light of how I currently lead and manage the teams, and I'm aiming for X, then the discomfort is not really an enemy, but a measure of building resilience and actually getting onto the other side. And then some of the tangibles would be feedback, and really seeing how our spaces are starting to change, our teams start to behave differently as well, and about how do we then, make that broader and make it available at all levels, so that we can have a greater impact from a service offering and service line perspective to the next.
Bongiwe, what personal experiences would you say has shaped your understanding of diversity and inclusion?
It's exclusion through personal experience, and I think that we really have a dynamic history in our country, where as an African woman, I have my own nuance of what it means to be excluded from participation, education, economics, business, social, and the likes. And therefore, from having experienced that end of it, we can only hope that when we are in positions of leadership, that could be a core ingredient to do better. So, notwithstanding the fact that even those who have been previously excluded have a certain set of bias within them. So that was something that was quite confronting for me at a personal level. So, but at the end of the day, is to really look at our historical context and reevaluate in terms of what does change look like? What is the meaning of that change? How do we achieve it? Etc. But at the end of the day, I think that humanity has been built for relationships, Where you have depth of relation, you can really be able to get away with so much more because you understood. Where you have relationships that are not deep enough, you have little trust, and therefore when you have little trust, you have more formality in how you actually interfaced with that other person. So from that personal context, my awareness of bias has really emerged from, and it affects everything in terms of how I show up, how I raise my children, how I make decisions of, at a leisure setting where we can go and where we are not comfortable to go. What do inclusive spaces look like? How does this shift and change from a Cape Town setting in South Africa to a Johannesburg setting in South Africa? What is the image of success? What is the profile of beauty? And everything else in between. So from that context, really, it's about then how does this play out at a personal level? How does this play out at a leadership level? And really quite instrumental in how we shape even solutions that we broker for teams within that context of how we show up. Really asking the question, does each team member have the courage to show up as who they really are in our spaces, and we hope that we can.
Okay, on to my last question. How has your involvement in the LEP changed your approach to leadership and interaction with your team?
It's the ability to listen for understanding.
Wow.
And really suspend my personal judgment on the situation, something that I actively seek, because when we get into a conversation, we have a view, we have a ready response. Maybe something that is being shared really starts to irritate me because I just, why didn't it just get it done? But in the moment, there's really authentic power. It's suspending judgment and listening to understand and just really hear the person out. You will have your say, you will have your context, but when is quite critical so that you're not releasing a response so soon after the person has actually just brought their context. And I think that really allows us to have a little bit more authentic relationships in terms of conversation. And so when we need to have hard conversations, hopefully we've brokered enough trust in the process to be able to be direct and respectful.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for being here, Bongiwe. I've gained so much insight, and I know that the listeners will too.
Thank you for having me.